My name is Diane Kaufman. I'm 66 years old. I want to tell you something that took me an embarrassingly long time to understand. I'll tell it the way it actually happened. Richard and I have been married for 38 years. I thought I knew exactly how our marriage worked. We built our life around two people who were always incredibly busy. We had our routines. We managed our savings and our fixed income with a rhythm we perfected over decades. We handled the budget. We raised our adult children. We had it all completely mapped out. And then we retired. We were finally living on our investments and Social Security. Richard retired 3 years before I did. He was fine immediately. Just fine. I watched that from across the room for 3 years with great confusion. I watched it with occasional resentment, if I'm being perfectly honest. He never mentioned it. That's probably why we're still married. But when I finally stopped working, the silence in our South Florida house was suddenly deafening. We were just there, together, all day, every single day, without an office to escape to. We were looking at each other across the kitchen island. I realized very quickly that the man I loved was suddenly in my way, and I was in his. The entire structure of our relationship had vanished overnight. I felt like I was living with a very polite stranger, a stranger who drank my coffee. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. You wake up on a Tuesday and you realize you have absolutely nowhere to be. You walk into the kitchen, your husband is already there. He's reading the paper, he's breathing, and for some completely irrational reason, the way he breathes is suddenly the most annoying sound in the world, and that feels terrible. It feels ungrateful, not good weird, just weird. You start wondering if you made a massive mistake, not about retiring, about the marriage itself. You wonder if the only reason you survived 38 years was because you spent most of it at the office. I'm not going to pretend that was an easy thing to look at. There's a version of this story where I look good. That's not the one I'm telling. I'm not going to give you a 5-step system for marital bliss. I don't believe in those. I've tried them. I'm just going to tell you what happened when the work stopped and the quiet started, and what we eventually figured out when we had no other choice. We were standing in the kitchen of our house. It was 11 in the morning, a Wednesday. I'd been fully retired for exactly 4 weeks. I was wearing a silk blouse and good trousers. I was dressed for a meeting that didn't exist. I'd written it in the wrong week on the calendar. Richard was wearing shorts. He was making a sandwich. I looked at the sandwich. It was a perfectly normal turkey sandwich, but in that moment, the fact that he was making lunch at 11 in the morning felt like a personal attack. I asked him why he was eating so early. He looked at me very calmly. He's a steady man. He said he was hungry. I told him it was too early for lunch. We proceeded to have a 20-minute argument about turkey. It wasn't about the turkey. It was about the fact that I was overdressed for nothing. It was about the fact that he was completely comfortable in this new, empty space, and I was crawling out of my skin. I stood in the bedroom afterwards for 10 minutes in that blazer. I sat down on the bed and laughed. Then I cried a little. Then I was fine. That was the day I understood what transition actually means. It's not a date you write on a calendar. It's a Wednesday when you're overdressed for nothing and fighting over lunch meat. I realized we didn't know how to be a retired couple. We only knew how to be a working couple on the weekend. We had to learn everything completely over again, from scratch. It took time. It took a lot of uncomfortable conversations that neither of us actually wanted to have. So I want to go through 5 things I've noticed about marriage after the work stops. 5 things I really wish someone had told me before I cleared my calendar. The first thing I noticed was the complete loss of our separate domains. When I was running my business, I was the boss. I made decisions. I managed 12 people at one point. I managed my assistant. I managed the calendar. I was very good at it. Richard had his own career. He managed his own world. We came together in the evenings and we were equals. When retirement hit, I brought that management energy right into our living room. I couldn't help it. I started trying to manage Richard. I didn't even realize I was doing it at first. I'd ask him what his goals were for the day. I'd suggest more efficient ways for him to run his errands. I reorganized his golf equipment. He didn't ask me to do that. He didn't want me to do that. I decided our pantry was inefficient. I approached it like a supply chain problem. I spent an entire Tuesday pulling out every single jar and box. I threw away expired spices with extreme prejudice. Richard came in to find his favorite hot sauce in the trash. He asked why. I told him it was redundant. Redundant. I actually used the word redundant about a condiment. He just stared at me. He didn't even yell. And Richard would say very quietly, "Diane, you are not my manager. You fired your staff. You cannot hire me to replace them." I was mortified, mostly because he was completely right. I was treating my husband like a direct report. I missed being in charge of something. I missed the structure. That's when I figured out that we needed physical and mental boundaries. We needed our own separate projects where the other person wasn't allowed to interfere. It saved us from killing each other. That brings me to the second thing. The money conversations completely change. We're comfortable. My accountant knows the numbers. You don't need to. But even when you have enough, the psychology of spending shifts when the income stops. We went out to dinner one night with our daughter Sophie and her husband Adam. Sophie is 37. She's building her own thing and is occasionally exhausted. We went to a nice place. The bill came to exactly $420. Usually I'd just put down my card. It was a business expense, or it was just life. But this time I looked at the receipt and felt a sudden spike of anxiety. I was calculating withdrawal rates in my head. I hesitated. Richard noticed. He calmly put his card down instead. On the drive home, we had to have a very blunt talk. I admitted I was terrified of spending the principal. I didn't fully understand why, but the math felt entirely different now. It felt finite. Richard is steadier than I am. He reminded me of the plan. He reminded me of my father, Harold, who was an accountant. My father was precise and careful. He kept a little ledger on his desk. He tracked every penny. I inherited his financial instincts. I used to review my company's quarterly reports with a red pen. I liked the control. When the regular paychecks stopped coming in, I lost that specific type of control. I felt untethered. The morning after that expensive dinner with Sophie, I woke up at 5. I went to the kitchen and opened my laptop. I started building a spreadsheet of our monthly utilities. I was looking for patterns in the electric bill. Richard found me there at 7. He closed the laptop gently. He said we weren't going to spend our final chapters auditing the thermostat. He was right. But it took me months to stop wanting to. That's when I figured out that financial stress in retirement isn't always about the math. It's about the emotional weight of no longer producing. We had to sit down and explicitly agree on our new spending rules. We had to give each other permission to spend money without guilt. The third thing was the silence. Nobody warns you about the silence. Our son Jonathan lives in New York. He's 40. He works in finance. Our house used to be loud. It used to be full of phones ringing and schedules colliding. Then it was just the two of us. At first, I felt pressure to fill the quiet. I felt like we needed to be having meaningful conversations all the time. If we were sitting in the same room reading, I thought something was wrong. I thought we were growing apart. I'd interrupt Richard while he was reading his book to ask him profound questions about our future. He hated it. I hated doing it. My mother Miriam used to say that you only truly know someone when you can sit in a room with them for an hour and not say a single word. My mother was elegant without effort. I have to work at it. She knew how to sit on the porch and just watch the street. I never learned how to do that. I always had a phone in my hand. In those early retired months, I'd pace the house. I'd pick up a magazine, read one page and put it down. I'd ask Richard if he wanted to watch a documentary. He didn't. He wanted to read his spy novel. I took his preference for the spy novel as a rejection of me. It wasn't. It was just a spy novel. I realized I was performing companionship. I was trying to force a connection because I was insecure about my new identity. I wasn't busy anymore, so I made my marriage my job. That's a terrible idea. We eventually had to create a rule. We call it quiet hour. Between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, we don't speak to each other. We can be in the same room, but we don't talk. It sounds incredibly rigid. It's actually the most liberating thing we've done for our marriage. That's when I figured out that companionable silence is an achievement. It's not a symptom of a problem. We learned how to be alone in the same room. It's a very specific skill. The fourth thing is the difference in how you both process time. I don't fully understand why, but time moves differently for different people when they stop working. Richard adapted to the slow pace instantly. He could spend 3 hours drinking coffee and reading the news. I was still operating on corporate time. If I wasn't productive by 9 in the morning, I felt like a failure. I was moving at 80 miles an hour. He was moving at 20. We were constantly colliding. I'd get frustrated that he lacked urgency. He'd get frustrated that I couldn't sit still. I wanted to plan trips. I wanted to start a garden. I wanted to remodel the guest bathroom. He wanted to do absolutely nothing. I thought his lack of urgency meant he was depressed. He wasn't. He was just resting. He'd earned it. I'd earned it too, but I didn't know how to do it. We decided to take a small trip to Charleston, just 4 days. Before retirement, I'd have planned every minute. I'd have booked the dinners 3 months in advance. I approached leisure with aggressive efficiency. I tried to do the same thing for this trip. I printed an itinerary. I handed it to Richard. He looked at it. He handed it back. He said he wasn't going to a 9 a.m. museum tour. He said he was going to sleep until 10. And then he'd find a biscuit. I was furious. I thought he was wasting the trip. But we tried it his way. We woke up late. We walked without a destination. We walked down King Street. We looked at old houses. We didn't buy anything. We just existed in the space. For the first 2 days, my brain was screaming at me to do something productive. By the 3rd day, the screaming stopped. I actually tasted my coffee. I actually heard what Richard was saying instead of just waiting for my turn to speak. That was a revelation. I realized that my obsession with efficiency was just a shield. It kept me from having to actually be present. When you move fast, you don't have to feel anything. Slowing down forces you to sit with yourself, and that's uncomfortable. It took me nearly a year to downshift my internal engine. I had to learn how to let a morning just be a morning. I had to stop measuring my worth by what I crossed off a list. We had to find a middle gear, a gear where we could comfortably travel together without me rushing him and without him anchoring me to the couch. It's a negotiation. It's still a negotiation. Here's what I actually think is the hardest part. You have to figure out who your spouse actually is without their job title, and they have to figure out who you are. I spent decades being a founder, an investor, a consultant. I helped businesses grow. I was the person I wish I'd had at 32. I built so much of myself around being good at that work. When it stopped, I didn't know what the rest of me was for. I was travelling when Sophie's school play happened. I was on a call when Richard needed me to just sit still. I made choices. I don't pretend they were free. I justified those choices because I was building something. When that identity evaporated, the justifications evaporated with it. I had a business coach in my 40s who told me I needed to be more vulnerable. I fired him. In retrospect, he wasn't entirely wrong. Vulnerability is exactly what retirement demands of you. You have no armor anymore. You don't have a corner office to hide in. You don't have a title to protect you. You just have yourself. And you have your spouse. Richard had to meet this new, slightly lost version of his wife. And I had to meet the retired version of him. It was incredibly disorienting. There were nights I lay awake wondering if we only worked as a couple because we were too tired to argue. We had to sit on the patio one evening and have a brutal conversation. We agreed to stop referencing our old titles. We agreed to stop keeping score. We started asking small questions. Do you still like jazz? Do you want to learn Italian? We had to get curious about each other again. If you don't get curious, you just get resentful. We had to let go of the versions of ourselves that built our wealth. Those people are gone. They did their jobs. Now we have to be the people who get to enjoy the quiet. It's much harder than it sounds. I'm not going to pretend we have it all figured out perfectly. We don't. We still irritate each other sometimes. I still occasionally try to manage his schedule. He still occasionally reads the paper too loudly. But we're navigating it. We're making progress. I know the difference between moving forward and standing still while looking forward. I'm trying to actually move. It cost us something to let go of our old lives. But being able to look across the room at the man I married and actually see him without all the noise of our careers in the way is worth it. It's entirely worth it. If any of this sounds familiar to you, leave a comment down below. Tell me how you and your spouse handled the transition. Specifically, what was the biggest point of friction in your house during that first year of retirement? Did you drive each other crazy? How did you fix it? I read the comments. I find them useful. More useful than I expected to. Hearing how other people negotiate this phase makes the whole thing feel a little less lonely. If you want more conversations like this about the things nobody puts in the brochures, subscribe to the channel. I'll be doing a follow-up on this topic soon. Subscribe if you want to see it. We're all just trying to figure this out as we go. All right, take care of yourselves.